Hey guys, Freddy here. Welcome back to another retro magazine thing. Because this time we're going to be looking at GM Magazine issue number 5 from January 1989. Now, as I've mentioned before, these are slightly larger than average magazines and average role-playing books. Because if I hold up this copy of White Dwarf, we can see GM Magazine sticks out significantly. Which means that on my shelf this tends to stick out a bit and pick up damage as things go past. So these aren't quite as pristine as some of the magazines I do tend to keep. But there's some great stuff in here, including an interview with Gary Gygax from the time just after he'd left TSR and was setting up New Infinities Productions. One of the companies that I like to pick on a bit because they did Cyborg Commando on my shelf somewhere behind me. Now, it's a failure of a game, but it's a lot of fun, and New Infinities Productions did so much more than that. And this is Gary Gygax we're talking about, so he was a guy full of ideas. So it'll be a lot of fun looking through that. Now, as usual, I've got to ask you to do the YouTube stuff. Please like, subscribe, and comment below. Please let me know what you think of my commentary on these videos. My opinion might differ from yours, so please let me know where I've spoken rubbish. I made an assumption a few issues ago, because a TSR book had cover art by Brom, that it was a Dark Sun book, and it wasn't. So I made a mistake. Please point that out and let me know. I'll only learn if somebody tells me. But anyway, let's go on and have a look through GM Magazine issue number 5. So, this is GM Magazine, issue number 5 from January 1989. And it's actually kind of hard to read that. This effect that they put on the cover of all these GM magazines, a sort of splattered paint effect, I guess it is, does make everything difficult to read, because the red text here, Storm Speaks Out, is, what's it called, Moira effect. It's merging into the background even though it's a contrasting colour. I wish they hadn't used it. It was fine for some of the early ones, but they should have played it up and done something different. But anyway, we've got a cover image. Free Rutger House GM exclusive board game. Gary Gygax Untold Stories, Storm Constantine interview, Who Dies Wins, Dark Fantasy Remini Feist Detective Games Roundup. And this would appear to be an image, something to do with Blade Runner? Robots out, so far so good, so what? He's wearing the long coat, has the big pistol. I do think it's supposed to be something to do with Blade Runner, but I'm not sure. It could fit into any sort of near-future cyberpunk type setting. It's got the metallic background, while he looks dressed fairly modern day. Anyway, GM Magazine is a magazine mainly about role-playing culture. We're not going to find articles in here with how to improve the rules for Dungeons & Dragons, extra classes for Warhammer, adventures for Shadowrun. There is one adventure in here, but it's generic sci-fi. They don't really go into that at all. But most of the articles are going to be about role-playing and the stuff around it, and all the other hobbies which are connected. So collectible card games weren't really a thing by this time, but we've got some internet, or some computer games, because the internet wasn't even a thing, some play-by-mail, some live role-play stuff. Inside, first of all, we've got a massive advert for Fist, Steve Jackson, the Fantasy Interactive Scenarios by Telephone. Basically, choose your own adventures, but by telephone. So it will read you out, you call up a number, it will read you out what's happening, and then you can make your decision by pressing 1 or 2, for example. And as a choose your adventure, you go on to different chapters and play your way through. I played the first one a couple of times, and it was quite fun. Although obviously very, very expensive, because it was a premium rate phone number. 0898 was the premium numbers at the time. Going on, we've got a nice table of contents, an editorial mentioning Wayne, Tim and Paul, Wayne being the blonde guy at the back, who was in a lot of these magazines. That's what we're going to find as we flick through. The number of people that went between different magazines is vast, because we've got another one with Dave Langford, who I think's been in like 3 or 4 of these magazines. He started off in White Dwarf for ages, and then when they stopped doing as much role-playing stuff, only really covering their own games, they didn't need somebody reviewing novels, and he moved on. And then he moved on again, several times. I did like him. Critical Hits, books by Dave Langford at the back there. An advert for Labyrinth, a nice advert for GURPS. Looks like with 3rd edition cover, I think. And then we're into the news. So we've got stuff from Iron Crown Enterprises about Space Master coming out. Games Day 89. What else we got? Spirit of Adventure, just live roleplay. And when I saw Spirit of Adventure, I was thinking of the role-playing game. Spirit of the Century, Spirit of 77. I thought Spirit of Adventure was another one of those, but got it totally wrong. Stuff about what GURPS books are coming out. Renegade Legion stuff. London Play-by-Mail convention setback. Seems very odd to have a convention for play-by-mail. Surely you'd do all that by mail. Forgotten Realms calendar. I think I had that. I had some of the lovely artwork. I wonder if I've still got that around somewhere. Naming the barbarian hero of the novel The Crystal Shard. Oh, that was Wolfgar, who wrote the Forgotten Realms novel Black Wizards. No idea. What else we got? Gary Chalk, who worked with Joe Dever on the Lone Wolf books, is illustrating game books with David Kerrigan. I'm afraid I was never aware of those, although I did like Gary Chalk's artwork very much. Going from the time that he was just doing stuff in White Dwarf. Talking about Tracy Hickman and Margaret Weiss moving on to the Dark Sword trilogy, and of course we've covered the role-playing game for that on the channel before, but it looks like they're not going to be doing any more Dragonlance, which has changed because they are in talks with Wizard of the Coast now in 2025, probably returning to Dragonlance to revamp it. Some stuff about RuneQuest, an advert for It's a Crime, play-by-mail. Battletech stuff, the Periphery. Tank Attack, software. What else we got? Paul Boughton. Yeah, he writes for GM, but he did a number of stuff for older magazines. Stuff about David Gemmell. And then we're on to a big interview with Gary Gygax. Now, this is a fascinating thing to read through, because it's during the period after he left TSR when he's at New Infinities Productions, the people behind Cyborg Commando. And he is being a lot more giving here. I always found Gary Gygax tended to boost up his own part in things quite a bit. But I think after leaving TSR, when he didn't have to bother about being so protective of Dungeons & Dragons because it was his company, he became a lot more open and started to... He credits Dave Arneson with everything he did and talks about how Frank Mincer, who he was working with at New Infinities, really developed Dungeons & Dragons and made it what it now exists. Kim Mohan then talks about as well. Some really interesting stuff in there and a big list of everything that he's published up to that point. Even the derivative, where his name is from. A nice advert for Death's Head. Loved that comic. Thought it was brilliant. Buy this comic and stay healthy. Yes. Anything on fanzines? Nothing I really recognise there. I really didn't get many fanzines back in the day. Solo adventures. So Murder off Miami. The Malansai Massacre. Here with the Clues and Who Killed Roger Prentice and Orient Express. Espionage, a strategy board game. It's a Crime, as I mentioned, a play-by-mail. A board game playtest for Circus Imperium, which does look very nice with the standout bits. Advert for different role-playing games you can buy at the top. A tabletop playtest for Gumshoe, which they rate as 8 out of 10 for value for money, 8 out of 10 for playability, but complexity is 5 out of 10. Now, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Is it not complex, so it's 5 out of 10? Or is it too complex, so it's only 5 out of 10? I don't really get how their rating score works, I'm afraid. But Gumshoe is a game I constantly get mixed up with TSR stuff. I constantly think of it alongside things like Boot Hill and Top Secret. But it's by a completely different company, Sleuth Publications. I must dig it out sometime and have a look through it for the channel. Tabletop playtest, Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective. Some very nice maps and things in there. I'm a real sucker for maps. A TSR playtest for Buck Rogers' Battle for the 25th Century. This is during the period when Lorraine Williams had taken over TSR and she already owned all the licenses for Buck Rogers, so arranged for TSR to do lots of Buck Rogers games. Again, must cover the role-playing game. Also got Mercenary Spies and Private Eyes by Michael Stackpole, also by Sleuth Enterprises. Axis and Allies, I understand that's a lot of fun. A video game, Chrono Quest. I'm afraid I don't really remember that one. For MERP, we've got Far Harrod and Shadow in the South. An update about play-by-mail stuff. Some very nicely painted miniatures. I really like the head of that Eldar Dreadnought, made out almost orc-like. A Merchants of Menace books. So an excerpt, sort of talking about horror being used across from novels into role-playing. The board for Rupter House, their free game, which is set in a post-fantasy world where necromancers now are becoming accountants and orcs are doing the 9 to 5. And trouble's going on in a house. It seems like a lot of fun, very light-hearted. There's different rules for it. Going on for multiple pages, all the tokens to be used. Explaining how it works out and what tokens you use. An advert for espionage. Didn't we pass that one already? Subscription page for GM. Alan Crump talking about books. Some small ads. Classified ads. I wonder if David ever got somebody in Eastbourne to play with. More small ads where you can buy GM magazine. A thing about live action roleplay. Although this looks more like paintballing. I wonder if they sort of combine the two to make it into military or cyberpunk in the forest. Gunpoint Leisure advert. A short story, Christmas Alone, a gothic horror story. So horror was very much the target of this issue. Things about multi-user dungeons, so the first online role-playing games. An interview with Raymond E. Feist. I've never really read any of his novels, so I do know he's quite massive. A scenario, as I said, a science fiction one, Golden Egg of the Ancients. Now, I said in previous videos that I would go through these adventures in more detail, but there's not much detail to go through this. It's only 4 pages long, and most of it's maps, and as you can see from the flow diagram of the adventure, it's very straightforward. You're looking for a large orange gemstone, the Golden Egg of the Ancients, and you're going spaceship to spaceport to library to alien zoo. There's a Galaxium Agents encounter, there's a Pirates encounter, Temple of Zahan, and the Android Chamber where you'll find it. And it details out all the locations. So we've got on the spaceship, the spaceport, Library of Gothnak. We've got the map of the city here, Alien Zoo, Temple of Zahan, Chamber of the Android, and a map of the area around the Temple of Zahan. Talks briefly about the different NPC groups. Obviously it's not written for any role-playing game, so there's no stats. A very simplistic adventure, but I think you could probably have fun in the evening, just delving into your favourite science fiction role-playing game, coming up with some pre-gens and just running them through that. An advert for the Golden Demon Award winners, very, very nicely painted miniatures. And then an interview with Storm Constantine, a fantasy or dark fantasy writer of the time. Now, she was all over magazines around about here. Terry Pratchett was as well, but Storm Constantine was heavily covered and connected her stuff to role-playing, and a very interesting person to hear write or read or be interviewed. Now, I thought when I read this, I haven't heard of her for a few years, and unfortunately I found out she died back in 2021 in January, so it's almost 5 years since she passed, at a very young age, 64. But a lovely interview with her, going into where she gets her inspirations from. Then we're on to letters pages. Talking about comics. Very generically, it's not talking about anything particular. There's mention of some various ones, the Untouchables comics, Shadow, Sherlock Holmes and the Saint. Not really going into detail about what great comics were out. It's more talking about sort of detective comics without being into Batman. And as I said, David Langford's critical hits. I much preferred the way he laid them out before, where you would get the headings of the books so you could spot things more easily rather than just italicized. We can see that he's reviewing Weird Sisters here. What else? Days of March, Homunculus. Not a thing really I've heard of. Another advert for GURPS, repeated from inside using the same imagery. And then on the back cover, we've got an advert for Battletech The Periphery. Star systems and the outskirts of the inner sphere make up the area known as the periphery. So it's a sort of area sourcebook, fleshing out worlds and things that you might visit in Battletech. Worlds where battles will go on. So that's GM Magazine issue number 5. Some very nice stuff from the 80s. Most of it interviews, I have to say. I loved reading through the Gary Gygax stuff. A real glimpse into where his mind was as he'd been forced out, but was trying to rebuild through new infinities. Great, great stuff. Really enjoyed this one. So that was GM Magazine issue number 5. Some great stuff in there. And if you're looking at role-playing as an industry and trying to find out what was going on within that world, it's definitely a great way of peeking into that. A very detailed interview with Gary Gygax, and a nice little interview with Storm Constantine, and about all the fantasy stuff that she was writing. When you're stuck in Britain, miles away from all the big conventions in America, where you'd actually get to meet these people, it's a wonderful way of picking up the inside stories and learning what's actually going on within the industry. Loads of new stuff without really giving us too much substance on role-playing games. There's not any new rules in there, new classes, new species, adventures as such. Just a whole bunch of stuff about our industry, where it was sitting at the beginning of 1989. So lovely, lovely stuff. But anyway, as usual, I think I've been wittering on for quite long enough. So thank you very much for watching. As always, most of all, you look after yourselves, and I'll catch you later. Bye now.